Hi everyone, I'm Olivia, and I'm going to talk about the Renaissance, which is arguably one of the most important time periods to know about for the AP Euro test in May. The Renaissance is the first time period that's really tested. The Middle Ages are pretty important, but you really should know the Renaissance in relationship to the Middle Ages, because it's a rebirth. That's what Renaissance means. It means a rebirth. So the Renaissance happened from about 1300 to 1600. But the High Renaissance, the part where all of the artists and crazy things and awesome things are happening, that's from about the 1490s until 1527, when Rome was sacked. So that's the High Renaissance, but the entire thing had a pretty big span. So understanding the whole rebirth, you have to understand what it was coming out of. So it was coming out of the Middle Ages, which was also known as the Dark Ages, and it was definitely a dark period in Europe. After Rome fell, just things weren't too great in Europe. So you can classify it in the Three Calamities, which is the Black Death, a huge plague that killed off tons and tons of people in Europe. And then there was the Great Schism, which broke apart the Catholic Church, and at that time the Catholic Church ran the daily lives of the people who were in serfdom. It was the heart and soul of their day. So to have the church break in half, that was a really big deal. And then the third piece of the Three Calamities is the 100 Years' War, which was happening between England and France. And it happened for more than 100 years, but it was a series of wars and battles between the two. That's where Joan of Arc comes into play, if you know about her. She was pretty cool. So all these calamities were happening. And then, all of a sudden, in Europe, there's this huge explosion and rebirth. So when you're studying any time period, you can categorize it and study it with different sections. These sections being God, man, science, politics, and art. So let's go through one by one and understand the Renaissance. Alright, so for God in the Renaissance. So this is important to note that there was two different kind of types of the Renaissance, or sections. There was the Italian Renaissance, and then there was the Northern Renaissance, which is pretty much everywhere else in Europe. So in the Italian Renaissance, which we kind of focus on, it's a big deal that serfdom has ended and that the state is becoming supreme over the church. So there's always church and state, but it used to be church was on top during serfdom, but now state is becoming on top with all of these new monarchs. When we talk about new monarchs, that's kind of the next time period after the Renaissance. That's when you start talking about Charles V and the Habsburgs and everyone who is asserting dominance over their state. And then we have state-controlled religion, and you can talk about Louis XIV. It's a big deal that these monarchs are asserting control. It's only then they have say over the church. Take Henry VIII, for example, in England. He didn't like what the church was up to, right? He wanted to get a divorce for like the 5th time or something. And he decided, well, I'm going to make my own church. So it's him and all of the new monarchs who are creating this mentality that state is greater than church. Plus, all of the popes are super corrupt in this time period. The prime example of this is Alexander VI. He was a Borgia in Italy, and he was so corrupt. He had tons of kids, which popes shouldn't have kids, but he had tons of them. He was corrupt, and the church was just going downhill. And this was right after the Great Schism, so nothing good was going on right there. And then we can also talk about, this kind of goes from the God, and then we're transitioning into man. There's a big intellectual movement of that time period was humanism. It was secular humanism in Italy, but it's basically this glorifying of the individual and who the individual is, and we have dominance over the earth, and man is great. And then you get all the art that comes out of it, all the humanist art of like Michelangelo and like all of these men like just standing, and the statue of David. So basically, man equals humanism. There's a big focus on the individual and who the person is, and it's a big change from being these slaves in serfdom. And it's a rebirth of who who they think they are. It's a good thing for the most part. All right, next up we have science. So the Renaissance was the very, very beginning of the scientific revolution. Then we get medical advances. People are starting to reassess the model of the atom. Democritus in ancient Greece had come up with the model of the atom pretty much as a Lego, a building block of the entire world. People are starting to reassess this and kind of come back and use philosophy plus science to rethink the world around them. And this sparks the scientific revolution. All right, politics. This is when the new monarchs really come into play. New monarchs again. Popes are a terrible leader at this point. The Pope is supposed to be the moral leader. The Catholic Church was huge in Europe, but they're not being a very good example of what a person should be and what a leader should be. Same with all of the rulers of the city-states in Italy. Machiavelli wrote Prince, which is an awesome little bomb to drop on an LEQ or a DBQ. Prince is talking about how your prince or your king of your city-state should be noble, they should be strict, everyone should learn to respect them. And this model kind of became the supreme example of what a good ruler should be, what everyone should strive to be in a time where the rulers weren't all that great. All right, and last but not least, we have the arts, which was hugely influenced by humanism. We have so many great examples of showing man in all of its glory and kind of this power that they hadn't found before. It's totally shown in all of the statues and the paintings, Michelangelo and the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And then we kind of transition a little bit into Baroque art, which is a little more Catholic in nature, which is where we get Bernini in St. Peter's Basilica over the altar. We have Donatello, we have Michelangelo, we have Da Vinci, we have all of these amazing, crazy artists all jam-packed into the same little 50-year period, which is crazy to think about. But if you think about it, that's because of the atmosphere and the rebirth that was going on. It was amazing and an incredible time period. So going through God, man, science, politics, and art, we can understand kind of what was going on. And that the Renaissance isn't such a big thing in and of itself, but it's a big thing with the time period that preceded it. So you have to understand that the Middle Ages, dark, the Three Calamities, and then you can understand that man is freed from serfdom, and humanism is this great new thing that's come out glorifying the individual. So that's roughly what you need to know about the Renaissance. Have good examples of exact paintings and exact writings, including you can reference the Sistine Chapel, you can reference Michelangelo's David, you can reference Prince by Machiavelli. Have a couple good, strong examples that you can drop in an LEQ, a DBQ, even a short answer question, just to reference humanism and what was going on and back up and use it kind of as outside evidence and score those extra points on the LEQs and the DBQs. So good luck with your test in May, and thanks for watching.